for about a month. And Ronnie Secoy was managing a company that this retired flight surgeon was operating in Dayton, Ohio, which is not far from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where this flight surgeon had lived his life, worked, and retired. And we have been hearing how he was jerked out of bed around 2 o'clock in the morning by a phone call from the base, told by a general who came on the phone to get there in 45 minutes. He knew something serious, couldn't believe it when he got there, and there were 3 generals, and they, without any orientation and no explanation, handed him a clipboard, gave him a pen, and told him to enter a room and to make any notes as a flight surgeon of anything that came to his mind. And that, as he said, was when he walked through a door and his world turned upside down, because what was on the table were 2 extraterrestrial biological entities that were clearly not human, and he even compared them to being doll-like. And what we are now going to go into is something that may actually have been described, George, in a July 22nd, 1947 Interplanetary Phenomenon Unit summary. This was leaked to Bob and Ryan Wood, who produced the excellent MajesticDocuments.com website.
Right.
You can see this entire Interplanetary Phenomena Unit July 22nd, 1947 summary at www.majesticdocuments.com. But before we go into this next audio excerpt from Ronald Secoy, I want to share a paragraph that describes an autopsy that might be the 2 surgeons at Wright-Patterson that the colonel flight surgeon was observing. And here we go. It says, this is about bodies that were recovered from White Sands at the Trinity site. Dr. Detlef Bronk has been asked to assist in the autopsy of one well-preserved cadaver to be done by Major Charles Ray, R-E-A. From what descriptions the team was able to learn and from photographs taken by intelligence photographers, the occupants appear in most respects human, with some anatomical differences in the head, eyes, hands, and feet. They have a slight build, about 5 feet tall, with grayish-pink skin color. They have no hair on their bodies and are clothed in a tight-fitting flight suit that appears to be fireproof. Some of the bodies looked as if they had been burned on the head and the hands. Their overall stature reminds one of young children. It is believed there were male and female genders present, but that was hard to distinguish. Okay, now we know that the flight surgeon said he could see no sexual organs or orifices, and he estimated that they were 4 feet tall, and he compared them to dolls because they were so perfect looking. And here we have this issue of this tight-fitting flight suit. Well, that may be the way the Interplanetary Phenomena Unit report described what the flight surgeon said was inorganic skin, a fabric instead of skin, along with those optical eye devices. And in this report, the idea of the android wasn't detailed, but this may be the same autopsy, and that the 2 doctors doing the work that is being observed by the flight surgeon could very well be Dr. Detlef Bronk, who is on the original Harry S. Truman Majestic 12 list of experts to advise and study and monitor the extraterrestrial situation, and Major Charles Ray. Now, an interesting point is that the colonel flight surgeon told Ronald Secoy that at one point, perhaps overcome by what he said was a horrible stench in the room and it was warm, that the 2 doctors doing the autopsy asked to take a break, and everybody took a break, and the flight surgeon could no longer hold back. He vomited. When the generals realized that the flight surgeon was really upset and had vomited. Here now is what happened next.
All right.
And I said, well, what happened next? And he said, they took me up the hall, and they'd never take me back. And I said, are you saying you didn't do a good job? And he said, from their perspective, I don't think I did do a good job, that I was the wrong man. And that's when he broke down again, and he said, and I was the wrong man. And why did they do this to me? I'm not a specialist. I'm not a pathologist. I wasn't a real surgeon that did surgery on people. I was just a basic doctor. Why me? They shouldn't have involved this in my life. I shouldn't have been caught up in this. And then to threaten me and tell me I could be court-martialed if I ever told anybody, that I could be imprisoned for the rest of my life. That's when I realized he'd been carrying this thing inside of him all these years and replaying this. It went through my head. There's got to be moments that this comes back to him, maybe on a daily basis, that he's been locked in this nightmare.
And you are talking to me on June 27th, 2006 about all of this. Why?
Well, this shook me up, too. And I'm a man of my word. I carried this inside myself for years. And needless to say, you know, every time I would see a movie or something on television or Star Trek or anything, I would relive these moments of discussing these events with this man all through these decades. But I never thought about telling anybody. One, I gave my word, but two, who would you tell it to? And I didn't want to be thought of as being crazy, because back in those times, that many years ago, if anybody said they believed in aliens or whatever, you'd be laughed at. There wasn't the kind of revelations that have come out over the last 30 years. But over the course of time, I began to see things on television and hearing events, and quite frankly, you. The number of times that I've heard you on radio giving very detailed interviews with people and uncovering facts, and it would be like pieces of a puzzle. And one day I had this thought in my head that this whole issue is like this gigantic, huge puzzle the size of a basketball court or something, with all these pieces. It's so complex, and you got to turn over all the pieces to see the whole picture of what this whole thing is, that this is a gigantic thing to comprehend. And I know one little piece of the puzzle, that's all. But it's one little piece that somebody ought to come forward, because over the course of time, as I would hear things about this on these talk radio programs that I like to listen to, I used to get angry of, why don't these people come forward? These people that went through this and knew things about this. And then one day it just dawned on me, well, you know something about this and you haven't come forward. And so that disturbed me for some time, and I thought about that. But how do I do this, and who would listen to me? And I just heard about it, and I didn't see it myself. And then one day I said, I'd been to your webpage before, and I went back, but I'd never even looked at it in terms of contacting you. I just would look to see what was there at Earth Files. I decided to go back again. I looked it over, and then that's when I saw the thing about how to contact you. And I swallowed hard, and then I didn't do it. I backed out, and I thought about it for a day, and I went back, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And that's when I entered the message in to contact you. And then a couple weeks went by, and I said, well, I did it. But she didn't go and contact me back. And the very day that I said she isn't going to contact me back, there was an email from you. These bodies, they came from somewhere. That means that there were people that handled them. They were transported across the United States. There were people involved. They came to Wright-Patterson, and if they were there at Wright-Patterson, that means people knew about it. In that building, when this autopsy was going on with this gentleman, there had to be, just in that area, by the conversation I had with him, I counted up in my head, there had to be a dozen people right there. And then those people had other people around them, the security, the doctors, the generals, their support staff. How many people know about this? And if there are that many people involved, how can it be that so many people don't come forward? And then I realized, when I think about that, I'm looking at this dynamic human being, college-educated, a doctor, a colonel in the Air Force, that this shattered his life, and that he was afraid. He was afraid by the threats they made against him. If you could intimidate such a dynamic individual that's a colonel in the military, that he's terrified that they'll ruin his life, that they'll allow to put him in a room someplace for the rest of his life and he'll never get out, if he would ever convey what he saw or heard to anybody else, what do they do to lesser people?
Did they threaten him with anything else besides court-martial and being drummed out of the military?
Yes.